Hi, welcome to another video recording, Hebrew video recording, and this one we're going to be looking at Peh-Nun, which could be considered as intermediate Hebrew. We're looking at the weak verbs in this particular recording. So for those of you who are on the internet hoping for something more simpler, I can only apologize. This has to be done for the sake of the class. We're looking at the weak verb called Peh-Nun. Now, if you remember the verbs, we defined our verbs looking at via the three root letters Peh, Ayin, Lamed, Pa'al, and this is going to be the first root letter. This is going to be the second root letter, and this is basically going to be the third root letter. And so we're concerned with this one here, the first root letter. Basically, when that letter is a nun, it's weak, and we have to be very considerate when trying to understand when that nun's there, when it's not there, and how to recognize this particular verb group. So the first thing I really want to look at is a basic principle of assimilation. What we call assimilation. We've covered this before in numerous contexts. And the one we're looking at now concerns the nun, and the rule which we're mostly concerned with is that whenever a nun, I'm just going to draw three boxes here to represent any three Hebrew letters. It doesn't really matter too much what, obviously not gutturals, but that's another story. But we've got three root letters here. But whenever a nun is basically right next to another letter, as in this case here, whenever that's is the case, and the only thing separating it, in this case we can kind of like see the shva, but it's a silent shva. Obviously it wouldn't be necessarily like that in this case. There's probably going to be another letter here, prefix of some sort. Otherwise that would be a vocal shva. But when this situation here, when the nun is directly next to another letter, what basically happens is that the nun will assimilate and it will become a dagesh inside that letter. So that nun there basically will become a dagesh in the following letter. And this only really happens in those situations in which we're dealing with a nun and a silent shva underneath it, which effectively means it's right next to the following letter. So that's the basic principle of assimilation, and that's basically what happens in most of the Peh-Nun, or many of the Peh-Nun conjugations, and that's something we have to watch out for. So we're going to take a look at a number of examples, comparing them with the strong verb, just to see how the Peh-Nun verb actually changes in more real life situations. First thing I need to mention when you take a look at the verb table, which you should all be handed, you should all have a copy of it, is that some of the binyanim are not affected at all. The doubled binyanim, the binyanim in which there is a dagesh in the second root letter, which is the pi'al, the pu'al, and the hitpa'el. Those three binyanim all have the dagesh in that second root letter, and basically in these conjugations the nun is going to be visible in all situations, and that's mainly because the nun will not have a silent shva underneath it, but it'll have either a vocal shva or more likely a full vowel underneath it. So these three are not actually represented, which kind of makes it easier because it takes away some of the worry, if you like, of identifying this particular verb form. We're going to take a look at the kal first of all, and with the kal we see right here is our version, the Peh-Nun version, and with the kal perfect, third masculine singular, there's basically no change, and you won't actually see any change in the perfect forms of the kal. So we just have nafal, and it looks exactly like, or as respect to the vowels at least, it looks pretty much the same as the strong verb. As I'd mentioned before in the previous videos, the strong verb I've written down in blue just to compare the Peh-Nun, or the weak verbs that we're looking at with it. So we've got nafal, which is same as katav, basically, with respect to the vowel patterns. With the imperfect, we have that situation again in which the nun, which would normally fit in about here, but the nun basically, because it's right next to the pei, becomes that strong dagesh, and we're left with the form of yipol. Now the nun ordinarily would have been in the position of this kaf here, and it goes right into the following letter. Don't forget, we've got a slight difference in the type of dagesh, because right here, this dagesh here is weak dagesh in the tav, but this one's a strong dagesh. We know because it comes after the full vowel. So the imperfect, we have yipol over against the strong verb yichtov. So there we do see a question of assimilation. With respect to the imperative, what we see here is pretty much the same form, nepol, as the strong verb. And the reason for that is that right here underneath the nun we have a vocal shva, as opposed to a silent shva. And because it's a vocalized, the nun remains present, and the form looks very similar, or in fact the same, to the strong verb. So we've got nefol in this particular case, although there may be variations of this form, and I do ask you to refer back to the verb table or the relevant section in the Kelly course book in which we've been using. There are a number of variants concerning the kal as well. One of them is this one here. This is the only case in which this happens, but with the root letters lamed, kof, and het, lakach, the verb meaning to take, what we see is that the lamed in this particular case behaves exactly as though it were a nun, although it actually isn't. It behaves like a nun, although in reality it isn't. And so in the perfect, same as the kal perfect, Peh-Nun, we have lakach, no difference there, same as the strong verb. And with the imperfect right here, this is the form you'd expect to see. It's the form we'd expect to see, but it's not the form that actually exists. What happens here, according to what I've just said, is that we would have the yud, but the lamed would act as though it were a nun and assimilate. So you would have a form that looks more like yikach, like this, yikach, like that, with a dagesh inside the kuf. Just wanted to show you that form, what is expected versus what actually happens. So we have yikach. Now we've got the dagesh inside this kof, but we must remember that this dagesh is the result of the lamed right here, and it is not the result of a nun. So we really do have to recognize at least the last two letters of the roots, the kuf and the het in this case, so we don't try to reconstruct this form as nikach or nakach, something like that. It's a lamed. It's the only other Peh-Nun in which we have this situation, but unfortunately it is quite a common verb. With respect to the imperative, we have an alternative way of forming it, whereby the front letter, the first root letter, simply disappears, and we're left with the form kach. That's not the case with the strong verb. We'll always have with the strong verb the three root letters visible with ktov. So that's a variant by the lamed, kof, and the het. There's another variant right here with the nun, tav, nun. Again, this is an extremely irregular verb, frequently treated in grammars all by itself because it's so awkward, but it is nevertheless very common. It's from the verb natan, which basically means to give, basic sense of the word. So the third masculine singular of the perfect is very much the same as the Kal strong verb perfect, and we have the form natan. No problems there. Once we get into the second masculine singular of the perfect still, remember all the other perfects look the same, but here there's a slight difference, and that's because the second nun is weak. And the second nun, just like any other nun, once it's next to another letter directly next to it, as it would be in this case, then it becomes a strong dagesh. And so this dagesh, which is normally weak in the strong verb, as it is here, that's a weak dagesh here, it becomes strong here because it is in fact the nun, that last nun. And we have the form natata, which means you gave, something like that, if we're going to translate it into the past tense. The imperfect third masculine singular, we have yitten, and once again that nun, first nun, it's like this one up here if you like, that first nun assimilates and becomes a strong dagesh in the tav, and there's a full vowel before it, so we know that's a strong dagesh, which is basically the nun that was previously there. With the imperfect second and third feminine plural forms, remember this strange form with the prefix and suffix, the tav prefix and the nun-he suffix. Normally we have tichtovna, like this, but we've got assimilation on both nuns. The first nun of the root assimilates into this middle tav, which is all that's left of the root in this case. So we have titenna, and the second root, which is another nun, that assimilates into the nun-he, the na of the suffix. And so all that's left of the root letter is basically this middle tav. And that means they will give, or you will give, feminine plural. With the imperative, again, we saw with lakach, we saw that first nun falls away. That does happen. And similarly it's happened here. And we have the e vowel, and so it becomes ten. And we're still left with the last root letter. And this equates to the imperative of ktov in the strong verb. With the infinitive construct, a very strange form indeed, because we have the tav of the infinitive construct, which basically does have the nun in it, but because it's at the end of a word, we don't normally have a doubled letter at the end of a word, and so the dagesh is not inserted. So we're left with this form with the nun gone at the beginning and the middle. We're left with this form tet. And that indeed can be a very difficult form to identify. But once again, all we're left with of the root is the tav. And you've noticed that even though we have a degree of morphological neutralization, in this case here with ktov, the imperative and the infinitive construct, with the imperative and infinitive construct in the weak nun tav nun, we actually have the same, we have the difference, in the two forms. With the nif'al, once again, here's the strong verb to compare it with. We've got the nun, kaf, tav, bet. In this case, we would have the nun of the nif'al with the nun of the root directly next to the gimel here. And instead of having the two together, we have the assimilation again, and with the gimel therefore takes on the strong dagesh. This is in the perfect form. Previously in the kal, there was, generally speaking, there was no real difference in the perfect form, but with the nifal there is, because we have this nun caught in this difficult situation again. With the imperfect third masculine singular, we've got yikatev, and with the nifal, we've got yinagesh. Yinagesh. Again, we've got the nun here. You've got yud. You've got the nun of the nifal assimilating into the nun of the root. And we know it's a strong dagesh here. Well, one, because it's a nun, and you've got the full vowel before it as well. Because there is a vowel under here, we don't get any kind of double assimilation, if you want. Nothing like that, but you've got yinagesh. And that dagesh is very important to be able to identify at this time. And again, if you're looking at the imperfect of the other forms, it would be tinagesh, tinagshi, and the endings would be pretty much the same. As the prefixes would be pretty much the same as you would expect. There's nothing untoward there. It's just the nun that is being assimilated that we really need to watch out for. For the imperative, we have hikatev in the strong and hinagesh in the weak. And here, once again, you've got assimilation of the nun of the nifal into the nun of the actual root letter itself. With the hif'il, we have only two letters showing in the perfect. So we have higid versus hichtiv in the strong verb. It's a third masculine singular. This is a very important word, higid, to tell, if you like, a very important word, very common, so it's important that you are able to identify it. The gimel here, even though it's a beged kefet, we know that it's a strong dagesh here because of the full vowel before it. With the imperfect, we've got yagid, no nun, because it's assimilated right next to the following letter. And that obviously that kaf in the strong verb is corresponds with the nun here, but the nun has assimilated. So we have the form yagid, and then we have the imperative, we have haged, which is a shortened form without the yud of the hif'il between the second and third root letter. So we have haged versus hachtev. And the last form we're looking at is the hof'al. The hof'al perfect. Remember, there were two alternate forms with the hof'al. There was either a form with a kamat, with a shva underneath it, which was unaccented, in which we said hof, the ho sound. But there was also a corresponding form in which there was the u with the kubut right here. And that's the one which we're using now. So we have huchtav versus hugad. Hugad. And again, that nun is missing, but the first root, visible root letter, should I say, has the strong dagesh, which is really the sign of that assimilated nun. And then the imperfect, we have yugad, just like yuktav. That should probably be yuchtav without the dagesh there. I'll probably have to take that out at some stage, but that dagesh should not be there. So we've got yugad. This dagesh definitely should be there because that's the dagesh of the nun. There's no imperative form on the passives, the hofal, of which the hofal is one, hofal or hufal. Key points for identification of the verbs, of the Peh-Nun verb. One is that the only the beginning of the verb is really affected. So when you're looking at Peh-Nun, it's just the change is really just going to affect the front part of the verb, primarily, just as a general rule of thumb. Second, only two root letters are visible. So this is one case with only two root letters visible. So when you recognize that situation, you're trying to parse a verb, one of the places to go to is the Peh-Nun table. And the third one is that the strong dagesh in the first identifiable root letter. Remember, if there are only two root letters visible, then on one of them you are going to find, if there's that first one of the two, that's definitely a root, because remember, in the parsing, you want to strip away the suffixes and prefixes. Once you've done that, that first available root letter, if there's a strong dagesh in it, then there is a very good chance you're actually looking at a Peh-Nun word. And just to finish, I want to take a look at a number of common let's see if I can make this a bit bigger, a number of common Peh-Nun words, and here we go. So we have nagash. Nagash, I don't like particularly writing English, so that it helps you remember the words as they are. So we basically have nagash, which basically means to reach or to arrive at something. We have nadar, which means to vow, make an oath or to vow. We have nata, which would mean to plant. We have nasa, which is to try or to test. We have nasa, with the ayin on the end, sounds the same, which means to journey or to depart. We have naqa, which would be to clean, or to be clean, should I say. We have nasag, which basically means to reach or. And we have natats, which means to tear down or to pull down. And that's about it. Again, it's very wise for you to take a look through this video again with the actual verb forms in front of you so that you can see some of the changes for yourself, and also go through a page of text and see if you can identify 4 or 5 of these forms, even if you don't necessarily know what the full root letters are or what the meaning of the word is. So with that, I will see you in class and encourage you to keep working.